My gender pronoun is she or her. If you have any POI, please do so in the chat. And I'm going to set up my timer. Starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. From 2015 to 2020, multinational companies such as Unilever, Procter & Gamble, Chevron, General Oil, Exxon has been criminally sanctioned by International Environmental Criminal Commission for violating various environmental protection based on Tokyo and Paris Agreement. Exxon, causing more than 2,000 hectares of forestry in India to burn down for aluminum management, forcing them to be punished by closing all of their factories that exist in that country. Procter & Gamble, creating massive flooding and also landslide in Bangladesh, also being punished to close all factories as punishment in that country. General Oil and Chevron also polluting lots of oceans across Southeast Asia, most notoriously in Myanmar, also needs to force down to close all of their factories as punishment in those specific countries to begin with, right? We say that all of this punishment that we have been giving to these multinational companies by always constantly forcing them to close off their companies whenever mismanagement of environmental degradation actually happens is a very mismatched solution. Why is that so? Because it creates even bigger scarcity for the people on the ground, right? It creates more poverty, it creates more joblessness rate increasing for innocent laborers, for example, that needs to have their livelihoods taken away, that needs to have their jobs taken away, have all of their wages taken away, for example, through something that is not even their fault to begin with, right? By having these companies or having these factories close down all the entire country, right? We say that it is a very outdated mechanism to punish by conventional international constitute, by holding criminally liable, not the wrong individuals, not the directors only, but the entirety of companies to begin with, because it is going to be mistargeted on the people on the ground, for example, the innocent laborers that literally have zero influence in every decision making that these companies are actually creating in their countries to begin with, right? That is exactly why under opening government, we want to make the directors of multinational companies the one that is going to be personally liable for all of these environmental abuses. How are we going to do this exactly, right? Three mechanisms under this. First of all, we're going to treat this as a major crime, means that all of environmental degradation that is going to be committed by these multinational companies are going to be internationally sanctioned by uniform policies, not nationally sanctioned like what we're currently doing right now. In each country, they literally have different constitutions and different environmental regulation and whatnot. We're going to treat this as major crime. We're going to treat this the same as ethnic cleansing, also genocide, for example, to make sure that this is going to be internationally sanctioned by ICJ, for example. Second of all, we're also going to hold imprisonment in accordance to international environmental constitution and agreement, things like Kyoto Agreement, Tokyo or Paris Agreement, for example, with working hand in hand with ICJ, for example. Lastly, last mechanism, right? We're also going to replace this toxic CEO, these toxic directors, for example, of these multinational companies, by creating agreement between the board of directors of these companies and also the labor union in these multinational companies to begin with, right? Those are the kind of thing that we're going to do under opening government. To contribution, right? First of all, why morally acceptable to hold the directors criminally liable rather than the entire company, rather than forcing them to literally shut down their entire production costs in a certain country to begin with, right? Firstly, because there are two parameters of punishment that we need to understand in criminal justice system. First of all, in terms of intention, we say that every decision making and every kind of regulation that these companies are actually conducting have the biggest intention on the directors to begin with. Why is that so? Three things. First of all, knowing that lots of criticism coming from activists, people like Greta Thunberg or celebrities like Leonardo DiCaprio, for example, is going even more rampant in the last couple of decades, in the last couple of years, for example. And there is a lot of people that are trying to be woke, people that are trying to be more scrutinizing to all of the environmental policies that exist in countries that goes on multinational companies and whatnot, shows to you that these directors, that these people that are working on top of the ladder, for example, actually have the capacity to educate themselves about the issues that people on the ground are actually facing, for example, about the pollution that they're literally making these people to suffer from to begin with, right? About talking with the government, for example, for a kind of cooperation and whatnot, to understand the suffering that people needs to go through because of their environmental degradation to begin with, right? Knowing that they actually have the capacity to understand, knowing that they actually have the capacity and all of the bargaining power and actually have all of the influence inside of that company to change the entirety of regulation, but not doing so, shows to you that their intention in making these companies continuously becoming toxic to the environment is inherently something that malicious to begin with, right? But secondly, whether the biggest intention in this case is coming from the directors to begin with, because we say that they are also actually the one that has the ability to stop the harm from coming to happening to begin with, right? Two things. Firstly, when we're talking about environmental, or when we're talking about multinational companies, for example, a lot of directors actually resort to do marketing in toxic manners. For example, like doing greenwashing, for example, like what happens with EasyJet. Like what happens in EasyJet and also Volkswagen to begin with, right? These are all the decisions that are literally created by the board of directors, not the laborers, for example, not the people that are literally working in these companies that has literally zero influence for all the decision making to begin with, right? We say that these directors are literally the one that has the full bargaining power, given trust to run the company. And the fact that these companies become so toxic, for example, become so polluting to the environment is inherently something that needs to be responsible, that needs to be criminal liable to them to begin with, right? But secondly, on the impact, for example, Edu in room 1 got disconnected.
Ya, dia disconnect. Tunggu bentar, Mut. Pause aja time.
My speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Second argument, second parameter of punishment, right, is the impact, is the harm of the people that needs to suffer from all of this, right? We said that when it comes to environmental degradation, what's going to happen, what's going to literally suffer the most is literally people who are living in poverty, for example, right? People who are living in rural areas and whatnot, that needs to be the victims of all of this environmental pollution to begin with. And not only that, but this also create a huge impact, for example, domino effect also against another countries, just like what happens when Chevron is actually burning a lot of forests in Riau, and all of the smoke is actually getting also in Singapore and Malaysia and whatnot, right? We said that this kind of intention, the intention of these directors of not fixing the companies to become more environmentally friendly, to comply with international constitution in regards to environment, and also creating lots of harms, creating lots of impacts to vulnerable people, to people that literally has zero rationals in decision making and whatnot, is something that is making it morally acceptable for us to hold these directors personally liable rather than holding the entirety of company liable to begin with, right? But I'm not going to be dismissive, right? Secondly, the efficacy, right? The practicality. Why the protection of environment is likely going to be easier and more effective with top-down mechanism under our side of the house rather than bottom-up, which is something that opposition needs to defend to begin with, right? In 2020, there are more than 100 million tons of waste all across the globe, accumulatively counted by the sea pollution, land pollution, and air pollution. Based on the research conducted by UNICEF, only 2.5% is actually coming from the people to begin with, right? And the rest of 97.5% is actually coming from these companies, from companies that are actually doing a lot of environmental degradation, doing a lot of pollution and whatnot, and mostly also coming from multinational companies, right? This shows to you that no matter how hard as an environmental activist or as people that are woke in regards to environmental issues and whatnot, you try to voice out your concern about environmental degradation, changing your lifestyle into becoming something that is more green, something that is more environmentally friendly, this is going to be useless as long as you still haven't managed to change the calculus and the rationals of these companies, of these toxic environmental companies to begin with, right? And we said that the most effective way of you changing the rationals and changing the culture of these companies when they are all actually operating their production costs and whatnot is by changing the head of the companies to begin with, is by making sure that you're also giving deterrent effect for the next leaders, for example, the next CEO of these companies, by showing to them that there are literally imprisonment coming from ICJ waiting for you if you are creating another environmental degradation, right? We're not going to punish the laborers anymore, for example. We're not going to hold them liable and whatnot. We're going to hold you liable as the CEO of these companies to begin with, right? We said that this kind of thing is something that is very important for us to know, again, because all of this environmental degradation actually comes from these multinational companies to begin with. We said that the only way for you to stop this degradation of happening continuously is when you structurally change the main root or the root cause of the problems of environmental issues, which is these multinational companies that is literally never going to be solved if your only mechanism is shutting down these companies in countries, and you're going to create even more scarcity by creating even more joblessness, even more poverty to innocent people, rather than holding those in power actually accountable and liable to begin with, right? I'm sorry, I don't know how many minutes I've spent. Because my timer. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Uji. Now I call upon LO. Again, I remind you to have your own timer set, and if I get disconnected again, I will tell you again. the timer when the timer ends. But I'm pretty sure it's not going to get disconnected.
Perfect. If there's any POI, just unmute yourself, but please do it very, very please be considerable about that. All right, start my speech in 3, 2, 1. What do we want in the world of opposition? We want to stick to the status quo where we are not going to make directors of multinational companies personally liable for the environmental abuse its companies perform, right? Notice that this does not mean that these directors are going to be free from any liability, right? We're still going to implement any forms of criminal liability towards those who commit unlawful action. This means that if the directors themselves are directly involved in any forms of bribery or conducting these kind of actions, then they are going to be punished. If the employees on the ground are involved and they are the one that causes this environmental abuse, we are going to punish them. We're not going to make the fault of those employees to be directed towards these directors. This is what we stand under the world of opening opposition. But before I provide you with 2 arguments, I'm going to rebut several points that are coming from Muti, right? Muti argument pretty much told you that this is principally justified because these directors can actually prevent this, right? I have one response test. I think that it is important to note that directors in and of itself is not the absolute decision maker in a certain company. In the vast majority of instances, directors implement policy that was mandated upon by the shareholders in the general meeting of the shareholders, or they propose a policy that are going to be voted upon and agreed in the general meeting of shareholders. The shareholders are in fact the direct owners of these companies, those that possess control over where the companies actually direct, right? I can't believe I can implement something from my 3 years of studying law. But the point is, if the company's policies are not environmental friendly, these need to be agreed upon within the general meeting of shareholders. This is the burden of team government then. We argue that first, this motion is mistargeted because even if not, the director are not the sole actors that can make the decision. But even more, this director cannot refuse to accept the shareholder demands because they can simply elect another director that they can control or exercise the shareholders' personal interest at their own whim, right? Why the burden that team government need to defend is why they're going to only punish the director while disregarding those shareholders that also take parts in these kind of companies, right? We argue that no, we're not going to allow that to happen. I'm going to bring you 2 arguments. Number 1, why it is principally unjustified, directly clashing with Muti arguments. And second, why it's going to completely destroy companies' capability to perform good environmental behavior, right? Number 1, principally unjustified. We argue that it's completely impossible for a single person to oversee the entire operations performed by their companies in their own country. Nevertheless, to accommodate companies' operations in tens of countries, right? We argue what is just is when you only help someone that is personally liable, when you only help someone personally liable when they are directly involved with the unlawful actions in and of itself. Look, in the vast majority of instances, directors are only involved in a macro scale decision-making process. This means they are the one to plan where the directions of the company should go, what forms of actions perform in order to achieve the utmost utility for the companies. But note, this is also subject of the acceptance of the general meetings of the shareholders, right? We argue that it's completely inhuman for you to make them oversee the entire process to every single minuscule details that exist in the entire proceedings. Why? Number 1, because it is completely impossible for those sitting on the throne to completely command every piece of actions that was performed by the companies. Because in every single actions performed, it will involve actors that you cannot control through any forms of means. Because even with the most advanced and substantial standard operating procedures, because if the people possess the intention to harm others regardless, and they are committed to do so, then no matter what forms of deterrence or preventive measures you're going to implement in order to deter this kind of persons, they will completely neglect it. Maybe these kind of persons are going to counterfeit any documents to show their local environmental compliance. Or second, maybe they will simply hide their unlawful actions from their superior, that they need to bribe these certain governmental authorities in order to get any forms of license, right? Resulting in these superiors unable to completely comprehend these situations or even to prevent it to happen to begin with, right? The intention of those actors are not directly liable towards these directors. But second, even if we're talking about actors who do not possess ill intention, those forms of actors are still a human. meaning they're able to perform flaws that no one can actually prevent. Maybe the standard operating procedures determines that you should not throw the waste in a certain places, but human error do exist, and maybe it is some kind of mistakes that they actually perform without the ill intentions to begin with. Right? It shows to you that exists so many externalities that one single human being cannot actually prevent, right? This is the reasons why it is unjustified to allow directors to be held personally liable for the companies for the actions conducted by their employees. Second argumentation, in the practical manners, where companies in themselves are not going to be able to make a better environment. We argue that directors are indeed the one who lead the companies to a certain degree, right? They envision long-term plan for the companies, and each and every single directors possess different values that they are going to implement during their period as a director. We argue that even if a certain director have great and effective plan to combat any environmental abuse in developing countries, most likely we will not be able to enjoy the fruit of their creations in the world of government. Why? Because as during the process, this new standard operating procedures was being implemented, will exist small or minuscule, but numbers in a month, because it is going to be widespread all across the globe, right? This means that these directors most likely are going to be impeached before the SOP was being implemented properly. Look, government never explained to you to what certain degree, to what kind of punishment will these directors will procure at the end of the day, right? Yeah, thanks. But this is likely for this kind of SOP to not be able to be implemented properly because we cannot control any external actors' behavior, right? But second, it took a long time for employees to adjust themselves with the new SOP because it is simply hard to read all hundreds of pages of the new SOP. Too many habit to change from their previous things, right? This means changes will only occur symbolically in the rest of the house. No meaningful changes can actually happen, right? Especially because Muti never explained to you any likelihood where the companies can be better in the future to begin with, right? Most likely, these SOP are going to be changed from one directors and their directors without being able to completely develop themselves, right? But second, this incentivizes companies to make a betterment in regards of the environment, because these kind of companies, if they indeed perform any forms of environmental abuse, they can simply sacrifice the directors. Note that these companies are not going to be only controlled by one directors. Exists a lot of people with the interest to take control of these particular companies, right? This means that they can simply throw down one certain actions if they can save themselves from any forms of, being limited to conduct their activities. We argue that status quo is better, in which that we are going to, for example, directly criminalize those people that actually perform, or even we're going to freeze the actions of a single company because it's going to incentivize them better to change. Very proud to oppose.
All right, LO spoke for 7 minutes and 16 seconds. Now I call upon DPM. Here.
Audible.
Yep.
Okay, let me set my timer. Starting my speech in 5, 4. By the way, if you guys have any POI, please do so in the chat. Starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Basically, I'm going to divide my speech into two parts, right? In terms of principle and in terms of practical, right? So that's actually the simple structure I'm going to deliver my arguments. But actually, in the principle level, I think that opposition's rebuttals towards our side doesn't actually make sense, right? Because their arguments is basically talking that these people might not be able to oversee every single thing that happens in their company, right? I think that this is actually like not toppling down our argument, because there are lots of directors that exist, right? Local directors might also exist, and those people are also part of the board of directors, right? I think that simply, even like in Saffron, like what is that island again, or maybe even in like Telkom, for example, like there's also local directors that exist even regionally in like Jawa Tengah and everything. So I think that they can actually have to make those type of reports as well, and they have to oversee like everything at least on their region, right? So that actually debunks that. They can also be punished because of that intention, right? Also, secondly, it's also on the idea of how people who are like stakeholders actually are the ones who control this type of discussions, right? I think that it is true that they are able to influence certain discussions that are happening inside the company. However, how it works is actually is actually like picking certain managers as well, right? So I think why this actually means that the manager that they have actually picked is also criminally liable for this is because they're complicit towards it, right? They are still the ones who are actually benefiting from this, and they're actively knowing that, because most likely they're the ones who have one vision with the board of people who actually have lots of stocks whatsoever, right? I think that they are also criminally liable because of that. Okay, so I think what opening opposition never explained in this clash of
UI.
principle. No, I said through chat, you listen to that, right? Okay, so I think that in terms of sorry, Dio, gue nggak bermaksud mentak. Okay, so in terms of principle of harm, like it is something that is still there, right? So I think that the mechanism that opening opposition didn't actually respond to was there will still be certain investigations that are happening, right? Like how much harm that is actually being how much harm is actually being done, and how it is actually being complicit towards those type of people, right? I think that those type of investigation means that it will still be proportionate in terms of punishment that they're actually going to get, right? Okay, so I think number 2, let's go to the practical. Let's go to practical, right? I think what opposition actually wants is only on the exactly on the ending, like in 7 minutes 15 of Aldo's speech, right? I think why it isn't actually something that is justified to actually punish the people on the ground who are exactly doing it is because they actually have no power at all to actually stop what this company wants, right? I think that most likely those people are blue collar workers who cannot actually nggak mau kok Andre jahat. Okay, like blue collar workers who cannot actually refuse works and cannot. I think that that's exactly something that that means that it is mistargeted, right? And also that this doesn't actually end those type of harms that these companies might do, right? Because if you close off these companies, for example, I think that the board of directors and the people in the upper management, for example, they will only be affected by like certain one of these companies closing, right? Although they have already reaped the benefits from the past of exploiting nature and also doing that in any other places, right? So I think that opening government's exclusive benefit at the end of the day is the idea that when board of directors, I do not speak Japanese, like when board of directors, for example, are the ones that are being punished, right? This means that these board of directors are the ones who are actually not getting that type of criminalization or criminal liability, right? But the moment where they actually become criminally liable is the moment where they actually want to care, right? Yeah, it's 410. Is because that actually affects their ability to have soft power with other companies and negotiations, and this also affects their ability to actually find like other jobs and becoming CEOs when they're actually the ones who are becoming criminally liable. And I think that this is actually more incentive for them because exactly if opening opposition's characterization is the one who actually makes these decisions are the ones who are behind the scenes, like the ones who own the stock, stakeholders, or whatever it is. Like they're also forced to abide by these type of rules because now the directors, they do not want to have a director who is going to go to jail or get lots of big fines, like really big fines, or like any other type of punishment. Like likely it's actually very likely for them to actually abide and give directors or at least give the vision of the company something that is not going to make these directors go to jail, right? I think that's how we sort of change the calculus, right? Fine, I'm gonna take POI from Dio, exclusively Dio, no one else.
Yeah, if it's actually the principle of complacency, this doesn't workers also complicit towards that?
I told you, right? It's also the ability to stop the harm, and they're actually the ones who are not making those type of decisions, and workers are the ones who actually force that to happen. And also the scale of the decision. Actually, this should actually be counted on the idea of what they're actually being told to, because like most likely these type of workers do not actually know how much they're actually hurting the companies, right? They do not have like any type of data. They do not have any type of like they don't actually hear the type of criticism, for example, right? I think that's exactly why it's actually not actually much impactful, right? I think what is impactful, in fact, is the CEO, right? As we've explained to you from the prime minister, like these type of CEOs are the ones who are actually controlling those type they have those type of information at the end of the day, so they are more complacent, right? So I think that so I think that what we have actually proven to you is not only that the intention is actually really bad, and we have also stopped the stakeholders from actually gaining more and more incentives towards destroying nature for profit, because otherwise, like, the board of directors isn't going to work, and hence the whole economic system or economic model that they're actually going to have isn't going to work as well, right? Because obviously the directors are the one who are overseeing and actually being affecting towards those type of things, right? So I think with that being said, I think opposition's comparative doesn't actually work, because if you're actually only capturing workers or being liable to workers, workers are highly replaceable. This is what happens in many multinational companies, so it won't be much of a deterrence for these companies, right? Very proud to propose.
All right, thanks DPM. DPM spoke for 7 minutes and 16 seconds. Now I call upon DLO here.
Hello, audible.
Yes, audible.
Okay. POI through chat. Jangan unmute. Sorry, kayak I know that I also break the rules. Tapi please, please listen to me. POI through chat. Okay, jangan unmute. It's very distracting. I'm kind of on sensory overload kind of, but ya, karena lagi banyak kotor. Anyway, starting my speech in 3. Wait, timer. Maaf. All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. What makes OG lose this debate is that they never provide you what is the combative policy that they envision, regardless of all of the benefit that they try to portray on what is going to happen in the rest of the house, but they never actually like mechanize what is actually the work that they envision, right? Because if it is true that the most vulnerable people is the unemployed people from closing down the companies and the poverty people in general, that means this part of an analysis is needed to be explained from OG. That is to say, what are the environmental policies that they envision to avoid the punishment, while at the same time generating enough profit while still maintaining the employment intact, or it will not going to like compromise the poor people on the ground with this kind of environmental policy, right? Otherwise, if you can prove to you that by their base case of the house, the directors will change and they will make structural changes to be environmentally friendly, but with the sacrifice of amazing job employment that exists on this kind of developing world, or even firing people on the ground of this developing world, or even make this much or make these products much more expensive, so therefore sacrificing poor people on the ground as well, that is the harm is parallel. But what is certain that is actually exclusive is what all those actually prove to you on how like there is a corruptive mismanagement that exists in this kind of developing world, that exists in this kind of multinational companies, that these kind of directors do not have like this kind of like enough like helicopter view upon those kind of actions, because those actions most likely are actually done by these kind of individuals that these directors cannot look at every CCTV that exists on this kind of like field, for example, on this kind of project, for example. These individuals will still going to through upon that, right? This the principle of why then the directors cannot be the only one that's going to be held accountable in their house is already been proven by Aldo and never been engaged by that much by the OG. What they explain to you, number one, on the idea of complacency, right? I think that I already said to you in my POI that everyone in this kind of director in this kind of multinational companies also are complicit towards these actions, right? Why don't you punish them enough? If the only like reason from Amos on answering my POI is that this kind of like laborers does not have enough data. Burning trees does not require to have decent brain. Okay, like burning trees is already you as a decent human being knows that burning trees will make environmentally destructive program, for example, right? That means that this kind of laborers should have enough power to actually like think that what they do is actually destroy the environment, and this is an act of environmental abuse. They should have created unionization, for example, to actually protest toward the directors from the bottom up of the internal structure of the multinational companies. But the fact that they are not doing that at all means that they are also complicit upon that. So therefore, I think that the idea of competency does not make it enough reasons for you to actually like hold this kind of directors hold accountable. But then like they also said that, oh, the idea of overseeing principle that although broad is does not make sense because we also like punish local directors. This is running away. Okay, like even if like, you also punish local directors, you also punish like the CEOs of the multinational companies as well. So therefore, the harm that also said also intact. But regardless of whoever that you're going to punish, like Jeff Bezos or the local directors of Amazon, we still I think that this is proved to be unjustified as well. Because why? Because number one, I think that CEOs of MNCs are usually just commanding general directive to each of the branches. The interpretation of the directive usually is done by the local branches as long as they meet the target of the general directive. So regardless of who actually doing this kind of who you want to actually punish accountable, right? So the problem is it is conflicted with a lot of other general directive as well that need to be met by these kind of branches. Things like profit making to meet certain targets, or labor condition to meet the general labor union. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. It is conflicted with a lot of general directive as well that need to be met by these kind of branches, right? So what these branches do is usually compromise. That means they will go to minimizing the environmental damage, but not stopping it to the biggest extent. That means in your house, regardless who are going to punish, the directors will still going to hold accountable despite the effort that they got, because that is what makes you, because that's how they can do best of both worlds. Okay, they want to be environmentally friendly, but they want to be profit oriented as well, because that is the way that these kind of companies operate. Otherwise, they're going to bankrupt, right? So this is directed to my other arguments. Number one, is it actually feasible to change us? This is engaging to whole feasibility argument coming from Muti regarding on how, like, okay, does changes going to happen or is going to be better, right? So as long as I prove to you on how like the changes that they envision in opening governments will going to make it worse for everybody, we think that this motion is not worth it, right? So what's going to happen in best case in their side of the house is that they're going to make environmentally friendly products, right? But the problem is that by making environmentally friendly products, other than making this kind of releasing new SOPs that although I prove to you on how it's very, very like complicated, and therefore lots of individuals that exist on this kind of labor does not understand. So most likely they're going to also do this kind of environmentally destructive anyway. But secondly, is that it's going to be more and more expensive, right? So why is it going more expensive if it's not obvious? It's resetting all the existing composition of products, researching new method of production, or even like buying new patents or new technologies that they want to seek to actually produce this kind of environmentally friendly products. That means to say that these products is going to be true and certain that's going to be more expensive. That means they're going to generating less profit. So because like this kind of like developing world cannot actually buy this kind of like expensive products, right? It's very, very hard to sell expensive products in poor countries. That is why, for example, like Xiaomi is much more better. It's much more like sellable in developing world despite they are environmentally destructive rather than iPhone, for example, right? So I think that this most likely when they're actually generating less profit because they need to meet the demand of being environmentally friendly, they're going to most likely closing down their branches. So therefore, job in employment that they actually protesting OG is going to happen in their side anyway. But secondly, is that when this kind of people does not actually cannot actually buy those kind of products, so they're going to have less purchasing power as well. The characteristic of developing world is that they don't have any established local companies. They are very highly dependent on these MNCs when purchasing products. That is why, like what is called Advan is prone to bankrupt, or like Mito, even if like promoted by Siskakol, it's most likely going to bankrupt, right? Because people are still going to like highly dependent upon those kind of Xiaomi or like this kind of like Samsung and iPhone and whatnot, right? So therefore, I think it's going to have less purchasing power. So therefore, also hamper the unemployed people on the ground or poor poverty on the ground. Therefore, the harm is exclusive, but the principle is certain.
Okay, thanks, DLO. DLO spoke for 7 minutes and 26 seconds. Now I call upon member Goff. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yep.
Audible.
Okay, POIs through the chat, yeah, please. Thank you. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We think on opposition's comparison when they stick to the status quo and already existing mechanisms of persecuting environmental degrading companies. They refrain to the status quo that Kak Muti already explained to you in her first 2 minutes of her speech about all the statistics of how these corporations are going to be bad, right? So notice that opposition's case is a negation at best, and they don't prove any comparative benefit to government's case. We think that even if on a marginal case, our benefit is going to be marginal, we're going to explain to you why that marginal benefit is going to be exponential in the long term, especially regarding environments. We think that this is a very important benefit. Let's first talk about why these directors are going to be personally liable, because we want to add the mechanisms that OG already explained to you. From CG, we think that these punishments are going to exist on a scale, ladies and gentlemen. So for example, we are going to have courts and we are going to have investigations, and we are going to figure out whether the environmental degradation came from policies that was signed by the directors, for example, or were they from middle management people that were not obeying the director's policies, for example. So we can have these sort of interpretations where if there is a middle management who is also to blame, we can also blame these type of people. But I think what's important is on all cases, regardless of whether the directors have active intent or not, these directors are still going to be punished. And the punishments are going to exist on a scale as well. If these directors are deliberately doing these intents and deliberately doing these environmental degradations from their own policies, then we have more extreme punishments, like, for example, very extreme monetary punishment or very maybe even jail sentences. But if this environment degradation doesn't come from the active intent from these directors, we are still going to punish them through monetary punishments and whatsoever. We think that's how we are going to explain to you how we are going to punish these people, because it's not a zero-sum case like what OO tries to push into government badge. I'm going to add 2 reasons why directors needs to be punished in regardless of all of the cases that OO tries to push. Because they try to say that, directors doesn't have the helicopter view that they need to create this transparency and accountability. I think their case speaks about negligence. And we think that this is also a problem that we want to fix, ladies and gentlemen. The problem is there is a discontinuity from the developing world to and the developed world of government environmental policies. So the fact that environment policies are not consistent through each developing world means that MNCs have different environmental policies interpretation in different regions. We think that's also a problem that we need to fix. Exactly the problem that they want to identify, because there is different rules and whatsoever. We think that's a problem that needs to be firstly upholded by these directors, and these directors needs to face them head on. We think if these directors do not do this, and we think that is negligence. We think negligence is just a viable reason why you should punish these people, because these people have the capacity to change, but when they don't, and when they are negligent and letting go of these harms, we think they are punishable. But even if these people do not have, you buy the arguments from OO saying that these people do not have the helicopter view, there is a second reason why we still need to punish them, and that is these directors still get profit from these corporations, ladies and gentlemen. The profit from the corporations go directly to their pockets, and they are still getting wealthy even if they don't know what is happening in the developing world. So even if they don't have the full information of what happened in the developing world, the fact that they still profit from that means that they should also get a punishment from that if there is a liability that exists in the environment space. So regardless of whether they have information or not, the fact that they still profit from that means that they should be punished for the degradations that might happen. Secondly, let's talk about how we get better mechanisms of accountability. We think that opposition tries to argue that there is going to be problems because middle management people are going to be able to fraud documents and blame the superiors and whatsoever. We think that this is also a benefit for our side. Why? Because on government's comparison, people in middle management can speak up and check the people of the directors who are holding in power. So why is this going to be likely, ladies and gentlemen? Because on our policy, these directors have a chance, these middle management people have a chance to speak up if their directors are doing environmental degradation without being punished, because the punishment, like I've explained to you before, comes directly out of the pockets out of the directors. So it's not going to punish the corporations, it's not going to punish the middle management, it's not going to punish the laborers that are in the developing world. It's going to come directly from the pockets out of these directors. Again, if there is a liability from those middle management people, we can have research and punish them as well. It exists on a scale. Why is this important? Because that's exactly what doesn't happen on their side. Because middle management people and laborers, they don't check these people in power, because they are afraid if they call out their bosses and their bosses gets punished, the entire corporations, ladies and gentlemen, gets punished, and that means that they have their livelihood cannot be sustained, for example, and their economies get slacked down and whatsoever. We think on our comparison, when people internally from these own companies can check these directors in power, there is a better way for you to get more lawsuits on the ground, because, well, now these people in middle management and people in low labor are protected, because the punishment only goes to the directors above. And we think that the companies are still going to be safe, because what OO tells you that there is a board of directors. This means that we can just easily exchange people in the director seat. So the companies are still going to be safe. The distribution, the production is still going to be relatively safe. We're just changing these people in the directors who are being punished for these sort of things. So yeah, that's going to happen. That's why you have better internal mechanisms of accountability. We think this is a problem on their side, because on their side there are a lot of people in middle management, like the local directors, and these people are silent about the environmental degradations that happen. They sometimes bribe the local governments and enforce and what do you call it? Exponentialize the effects of environmental degradation that happens within these regional companies. At least on our side, we get better internal mechanisms. We prove to you why these people aren't liable. Yeah, please propose.
Thank you, member. Spoke for 7 minutes and 25 seconds. Now I call upon member up. Here.
Yes, 1, 2, 3. Audible?
Yep, audible.
Thank you. Same speech in 3, 2, 1. This is a law debate, and there's no one in this debate talks about jurisdictions and how you set them up. I think this is regrettable from the opening debates as well as the closing government in this case. But second clarification I'd like to make is that opening government and closing government has misrepresented status quo and push an unreasonable burden for the team in opposition. I don't think that the current status quo mechanism would be to create a penalty to companies, close out factories, for example, and in a universal basis. There's no universal basis. They cite Tokyo protocols, they cite Paris Agreement, where that in fact that is not a standard of how companies would operate, that is a standard in how countries committed to reduce their carbon footprint, right? This is nonsense, ladies and gentlemen. So what's the comparative that's fair for opening opposition, closing opposition? I think a fair counter proposal will still leave environmental law to be localized. And what we can do is only to empower law enforcement in these local countries and also to increase the kind of standards that they put in their individual countries. Why? Because there's two folds. There's the two burden a team in government needs to answer. Not only that, one, they need to answer how can they establish an international jurisdictions with a uniform standards, but they also answer two, a shift in civil law, and you're going to introduce a criminal law inside the punishment. The only extent to the international community did this is only in ICJ. And you know what is what's actually being punished in ICJ is crime against humanity, that things that consist of genocide, for example. These are universally morally acceptable that we would punish this individual. But this does not include, for example, crimes against democracy, because democracy is subjective. The same goes for environment. And this is where the line that team in opposing oppositions is going to enter, right? So yeah, that arguments about CJS, and also how do we manage that? Okay, so currently in ICJ, there's only acceptable punishment for crimes against humanity, and that requires two parameters to be fulfilled. One is absolute morally wrong action, and secondly, a clear chain of command. And that is why we don't punish all military, but only punish the kind of generals, right? So firstly, absolute morality. So in this case, I think opening government and closing government talks as if their environmental issues is always a universal issues, a universal manner, when in fact it's not. Environment is never a universal manner. It depends on context and the trade-off that each individual country is willing to take. For example, in the past, it was acceptable to burn forests even in the Western states, such as United States. Why? Because there's an economic necessity for you to achieve that economic growth that you necessitates the burning of the forest. You take that trade-off of burning the environment, abusing the environment for the sake of economy, because at that point in time, people in the United States needs money. And this is what happens for people in the developing states in the current status quo. That means if you were actually introducing these standards, not only that they wouldn't agree, but assuming that they would agree, this creates an unfair disadvantages for these countries who haven't reached to the point that they can abuse their environment for their economic recovery, for their economic boost, right? So that's the first principal justification on why international law is environmental law is never international and never universal. But secondly, let's talk about chain of commands. The only way that ICJ can punish individuals for crimes against humanity is because there's a clear chain of commands. And I think it's established in terms of war, in terms of military, that the generals, for example, the head of state has this, right? It has a clear hierarchy where they are the one who commands people to do genocide. But when it comes to these people, to the directors, I think Aldo correctly pointed out there's a web of complexity that's on work when it comes to corporation decision making. There are shareholders, and the way shareholders forces this director to do environmental damage means, do you mean they are also culpable? But at the same time, the drive why shareholders wants to have that is also because consumers are asking for it, right? Consumers are asking for cheaper products. And does that mean you're going to punish consumers as well? Where do you draw the line? And this is where I think the biggest fault coming from team government is never explained this. But lastly, what I'm going to talk about is the essence of criminal law. The essence of criminal law is never about retribution. It's never about compensation. The essence of criminal law that you're going to apply to these directors is in fact rehabilitation. And the way you're going to treat these directors anyway, if you apply that motion, is that you're going to rehabilitate them. You're going to re-educate them. But what is to re-educate in this case as well, right? Because they're not at fault. They are only on duress, right? They are under duress to the fact that they might lose their jobs if they don't do these policies. So there's no point of rehabilitation. But at the same time, because you're applying this, you're not going to be able to implement a more compensation approach, for example, bringing it to to civil court, for example, bringing it to civil law where you can ask for compensation from this corporation. I think this makes it mismatch a solution they will never get to achieve on their side of the house. But last point is this, right? Even if we're going to talk about practical impacts, because the whole debate wanted to talk about it, let's talk about how this actually shift the blame from a structural institutional problems towards a more personalized one, right? I think currently there's a trend in the leftist people that they tend to blame individuals. Jeff Bezos are evil, Bill Gates are evil, right? These are the kind of politics that will only shift the blame from the structural problem and institutional problem, because you only see the problem on a personal level. What's going to happen under our side when we think of the problem as a structural problem, you're going to highlight more on how individual countries does not want to increase their environmental standard. The law enforcement in these developing countries fail to uphold the environmental law in their that they are set on their own. I think that's more important thing, to see more structural approach to separate and distribute the blame to people who can actually make the decisions, unlike what's going to happen on the opening government side. What I wanted to emphasize on this debate, this is a criminal justice debate, and a team that cannot explain their justification has to lose this debate. We're back to propose.
All right, thanks, member up. Spoke for 7 minutes and 29 seconds. Now I call upon whip government. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
POI through chat, and I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, I think right now environment problem is already being well talked everywhere, but we say that this director doesn't care, and what is in their brain is actually only about profit. When in reality, they're also one of the biggest contribution towards this whole environmental problem, climate change, and etc. Right? So what does it shows to you? It shows to you that actually this company that is actually want to profit, they are not directly involved because they actually keep wanting to get their profit, right? So what does it show you? It shows you that this director in the very first place has the capacity to stop it, but they don't do it at the very first place. I'm going to bring 2 issues in my speech. First, I'm going to talk about the justifications to make this director hold liable, and second, I'm going to talk about how this policy will impacting the environment in the end of the day. So first, about why this is justified to make this director liable, right? So opening opposition and also closing opposition saying that they cannot be held liable because they're not directly involved in this crime, and etc. First, I think Joshua already explained to you about how this director got the profit from this environmental problem. We see that this is already being enough for the first place to hold these people liable, right? But second, let's analyze why this director is not directly involved, even though it's their company and it's actually they have the capacity and also it's their responsibility to take control, right? First, we say that first thing first, we say that they are not directly involved. First thing first, because like I said before, they want profit, right? But second of all, we said that because it's actually what they actually think is what impacting them is only about the profit. How it gonna looks like in the environment, etc., is not their problem. So we say that they are actually just run away from the burden to make their company be more environmental friendly, and etc., right? And second of all, when we talk about because they want their branches to get profit, and etc., it shows a malicious intent, right? So we say that this is justified for us to hold this person reliable, right? Because first, this shows that these people, that this director that is not having direct involvement in this whole cases is a direct command for these branches to keep doing what they are doing. And we see that it's on their own capacity, and with their own capacity, what this leads to, right? We see that this leads to a lot of problems, right? For example, like a climate change that is happening because of this negligence director that doesn't want to take control of their branches that is kept doing environmental issue in this developing country, etc. It make them polluted. They polluted the river, and etc. And also, this shows to you about how this environmental problem is actually that big, right? And it also debunk the idea of causing opposition that it only can be held in ICGN or something like that. When it genocide, right? Because we see that this environmental problem is already as big as genocide since the day one. Because why? It's probably don't kill people suddenly, but we see that this actually, because of this continuous action that is coming from the director that is there being negligent, and etc., it shows that they're actually it's actually can kill a lot of people in the end of the day, right? So what does it show to you? It shows to you that it's actually justified for us to hold this person liable. But even if it's not liable, we say that even if this is not okay, we say this is still okay, right? Why is that so? First thing first, we say that first they're because they're actually because the environment problem is already that big. We see that is okay because it's going to create more efficacy that I'm going to explain in my second issue. And also now moving on to my second issue is about how this policy will impacting the environment, etc. Right? So first, so opening opposition and saying that they don't want to develop the environment policy, etc., etc., because they probably don't want to innovate or something like that. First thing first, this is untrue since we see that it's actually the benefit in ours of the house. Why is that so? Because we see that this director has the power and also they has the interest, which is profit, and also they also has like they want to protecting themselves from like getting shoe of the environmental problem, right? So what does it show to you? It shows to you these people will think out of their brain how to make a good how they will make a good environment policy that is also still beneficial towards their company or something like that. Because in status quo, these people doesn't think about that because they think as long as I get profit, no matter how the way it is, it's gonna be okay. But when this proposal is being applied, these people has the interest to make in a good sustainable environment policy, right? So we say that this is going to be more beneficial in our side of the house. But before 6 POIOO.
Yeah, we already told you on how profit is not the metric in this debate because also the labor by FYI also getting profit from this environmental destructive problem.
Okay, but here's the thing. This labor doesn't has the capacity to change the policy, right? They get the profit. It's not because of this environment issues because they're actually work their butt off all of for and being a labor in this company, right? So we say that this labor is actually doesn't has get profit in comparison with this director, which their job is actually to manage the company and and make sure of the company is working well. It is in their responsibility, and their salary is getting because of this job and their job, and they're doing a shitty job. So we say that this is going to be more it's the bang the POI coming from Kadio. So why this and whole analysis is important, right? Because first thing first, it's the bang the idea of that they would, and also it's the bang the argument coming from opposition, saying that they probably get bankrupt. It's going to make people on the ground be unemployed, etc., etc. It's wrong because this director still want to have the profit since day one, and they will think out of it because it's not, and they're actually capable of it. And second, also, this is actually prove the efficacy of this proposal, right? About how this company will actually, in the end of the day, make a significant change in their policy making to not to in this significantly change to actually improve their company and improve the whole environment problem, right? And also, like in coming from causing opposition when they're talking about jurisdiction and etc., we say that this is not as important because in your side of the house, it's still the environment problem is going to be more, it's not going to sustainable. Proud to propose.
Thanks, Government Whip. Spoke for 7 minutes and 30 seconds. Now I call upon CO, Op Whip. You're here.
Check. Am I audible?
Yes.
Nice. Okay. POI through chat. Let me sort my paper first. Rawa belong kalau kebakaran jadi well dan belong dong Kak. Nggak tahu ya, terakhir kebakaran sih jadinya gue ngungsi ya. So, I'm going to start my speech. Oh yeah, POI through chat, I'm going to type myself. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so here's the thing, right? This is how you're going to judge this debate. First of all, notice that in terms of principle, everyone is just, okay, they profit about this, they complicit about this. I'm going to tell you why this profit is not a good metric, why complicit is a good metric. By the way, first clarification, CEO does not pocket the profit. The profit coming from a company are being divided through all shareholders through mechanism called dividend, bagi hasil, through saham. So that's it. CEO are on a payroll as well. So if their argument is that CEO is getting profit, that's unfactual. But if they want to say that CEO also get benefit coming from this because they got paid and so on and so forth. But do notice that all the laborers, all the workers contributing to the progress of the company also at fault by that principle. Because like you can also argue that, okay, you are a worker, you are a social media campaign division in Exxon Oil, for example. You have the option to work somewhere else. Why do you work for such evil company? Then should those people be prosecuted as well? That's a clear cut where principle should stand on. If you want to win them by those principle, they need to show them why those principle applies to this individual and not other individual, and hence those principles are really something that justifies prosecuting them, or else it's just stating the fact that okay, they are complicit and so on and so forth, but that's not a justification. That's one. Same goes with complicit. I mean, I am also complicit for using my computer and using my stuff here that is environmentally unfriendly. Should I be prosecuted as well? That's a question that OG and CG never answers in this debate. That's why parameter. That's why if the argument is profit, benefit, complicit, and stuff, scrap them. Number two, let's talk about the capacity to change and so on and so forth. Do notice that we, OO has already talked, although the mechanization comes in risky on how the complexization, but okay, OOCO have that argument as well. So with that said, at the very least, OO and CO can get higher than OG and CG, because at the very least we are the one that contextualize to you what kind of bureaucratic stuff that happen inside the company that makes CEO only a puppet for the shareholders. The CEO probably can came up with like proposals, ideas, and everything, but who decide the final call? It's the shareholders, because the intertwined system that makes sure that shareholders can get as much profit as possible to make sure that their stocks can get as can stay as a blue chip, for example. That is the interest coming from it, and that's why directors are not morally culpable. But all else aside, if you think that those three analyses are not enough, risky analysis on international law should be upheld the most in this debate, because this is a criminal justice system. This is a law debate motion, and Rizky's argument on why, if you want to impose international law of environmental burden, like something like OG said, to all states, some states doesn't have the capacity to implement that yet, which means this international law and environmental law will be unfair. It's easy for CG to say that environmental is like genocide and so on and so forth. This is uncontextual. Genocide is literally have intention to kill certain races. But in terms of environmental law, notice that there are certain contexts in which the action becomes justified. Probably your country is poor enough. You cannot afford certain technologies to make sure that the palm oil plantation can be environmentally friendly, and hence you can only resort to, for example, forest burning, for example, because that's the only way you can do that. Or for example, certain environmentally friendly manufacturing technologies that we cannot afford just yet. And that is where if you want to impose a global international standards of environmental law, that is unfair, and hence this policy becomes dangerous if you want to go to OG setup where you want to internationally punish people. That's number one. In terms of principle, that is why CO wins over these other three teams. But let's talk about the impact, right? Because the impact is weird out of this, because suddenly because suddenly OG said, what's OG's impact? Let's talk about OG's impact, because suddenly they talk about like better protection, because now we can change the leaders, they can be punished later. First of all, leaders in CEOs in companies are installed by the board of executive. They can just pick another scapegoat in these terms. But second of all, considering it now as people will consider this now as a risk/benefit analysis for the next CEO. There will be no deterrence. And also, deterrence does not come from punishment. It's only based on the possibility of getting caught, getting prosecuted, and so on and so forth. Surprisingly, lots of CEO does not get caught. What does that mean? That means if OG wants to champion deterrence, there's no such thing as deterrence. But let's talk about CG, right? CG talk about creating director that will make environmentally friendly. Again, this relies on the idea that they can actually change something, considering how OO and CO has already characterized to you that most of the time their policy is at best performative. What they can create is performative, but the underlying ground principles are created by the shareholders and the systematic by the systemic problem that runs throughout all companies, which means that the benefit of directors creating environmentally friendly policies cannot stand in this debate. But exactly that goes to Rizky's point. Exactly what? Because Rizky has already told you how environmental problems are systemic in nature, are intertwined between companies, between customers, between governments of all states, between lots of stakeholders inside the situation. To advocate against environmental abuse requires you to go against the system, requires you to really tackle and solve the problem one by one through the policies, for example, through changing structures, through changing the incentive structure of the customers to buy more environmental friendly products. You need to change lots of layers. But right now, the society are shifting this discourse to individual level by saying that, okay, the one at fault is the CEO and so on and so forth. This is a bad discussion. This is a bad trajectory of discourse. And we think this does not solve any problem at all. This will harm the process of which we can solve the problem. And with all of those reasons, we oppose.
Okay. Okay, this is kind of intimidating. All right. Basically, I'm gonna divide my OA in 3 parts. Number 1, general comment. Secondly, on the rank, and thirdly, the reasoning of why I gave these teams the ranks. General comment. I think I would prefer if this debate were more contextualized on developing countries, because I think it was kind of taken for granted. And secondly, on how the teams could have capitalized on the practical benefits more, because I think it's in this debate the principle were very debated about. But I guess if we capitalize on the practical benefits regarding incentive of the company, incentive of directors, and mechanize it in a way that it is persuasive and not jumpy, it will be better for everyone. I think that's all for the general comment. Okay. All right. Rank, yeah. First goes to CO, second OO, third OG, and fourth CG. I'm gonna compare each team to other teams, and yeah, provide my reasoning now. CG, why you cannot go higher than fourth? Basically, CG brought 3 things. Number 1, why directors are personally liable. Secondly, why environmental abuses are more likely to be mitigated. And thirdly, that's 2 things. Sorry. Number 1, why directors personally liable. They talked about 2 things: negligence and how if directors gain profit, therefore they are liable. On negligence, I think there's no response to CO regarding why negligence is the metric, because then everyone in the room will be negligent, because then the workers and the laborers who do not report to the other people or the law will also be negligent. Therefore, this principle is not applicable. But secondly, there's no mechanization how then director is exclusively negligent, given that there are other workers who are negligent. But secondly, on gaining profit, I think number 1, the mechanization is not clear, why if someone gains profit from exploitation or environmental abuses, then they are liable, and this is called out by CO anyway and nullified by CO. Therefore, this point regarding liability already crystallized. But secondly, why environmental abuses are more likely to be mitigated, right? CG brought why mid-management worker are going to be more incentivized. I think this argument is very potential because it is going to, like, in a practical level, it is potential if it is more mechanized. Why is it possible that the workers are able to create such huge change that the companies will change their policies? I don't think it goes to that line yet. But moreover, why I cannot count this is because it doesn't necessarily negate OO's point. Why that? It's not true that mid-management or laborers or workers that are not the directors will not get away with if they are liable. Moreover, that there's no response to CO or OO regarding complicitness of the director, like the externalities outside the director's control. Therefore, those who are liable are those who are involved. I think it is very important to respond. Therefore, OO and CO's points regarding externalities that they are outside the director's control still stands, and therefore CG cannot go over OO or CO either. But thirdly, why CG cannot be higher than OG? Because in principle, I think the explanation is very jumpy. Like, directors are negligent or complicit because they're ignorant, they're profit-oriented, therefore they're liable. I think you had a chance to extend OG's case even further and fill in the blanks, but I didn't see that happening. But moreover, on intention and victims, right? You brought to another, like, some kind of parameter. Number one, on intention, about bargaining power, influence, and financial capital. Therefore, given they don't make change, therefore they're complicit. I think this is derivative to OG's case. Secondly, about victims, then I think there are. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. Oh, cannot be higher than OGs because in practical also, in principle, the explanation is more mechanized than what CG brought regarding the negligence and about profit. Moreover, it was already nullified by opposition bench. Third, OG. Why can you get higher than third? Number one, on justification brought two things. Number one, on intent, and number two, on complicitness. Number one, intent. I think the intent is already nullified by side opposition by saying that directors, even if they have the intent, the directors don't have the intent to do so or the power to do so to make environmental abuses in the company, because there are other stakeholders and externalities that exist that overpowers their decision making, and moreover their power is nullified by those stakeholders. Therefore, whatever they do and decision they have is not for their own personal intention or their personal benefit, but it's because the pressure that is given to them by their externalities. Therefore, it's nullified. But secondly, regarding complicitness, they told me about how lower management workers are not complicit because they have little agency to have power to speak out. Moreover, I think this point still stands compared to other points that says that, oh, every worker is complicit and whatnot. But why that does not necessarily mean justification can win is because it doesn't prove why the directors are liable, even though you manage to prove why the workers in the lower parts of the management are not liable. Therefore, still, you cannot win in this topic. But secondly, about deterrence, right? I think the stakeholders that abide to the rules because they don't want to be punished is already clear inside opposition when they told you that the directors will not be deterred anyway because there will be always stakeholders, new stakeholders are going to come up. This is brought by CO. But moreover, this is nullified also by op bench, because they told me that the directors don't have much power compared to stakeholders, and therefore punishment is not going to work anyway. But secondly, that deterrence is not important, because then even though it's kind of taken for granted, deterrence cannot happen because there's no likeliness to be punished anyway inside government, because CEOs are easier to get away for at least CEO. Therefore, that's why OG cannot be higher than third. Second, OO. OO brought three things. Number one, they questioned justification brought by OG regarding generalizing application of punishment universally. But secondly, deterrence cannot happen. And thirdly, structural to individual harm and whatnot. Firstly, about questioning justification. Number one, the reason why they get second is because there's no response from CG or effort to try to nullify this point regarding universal punishment to companies. But secondly, although CG cannot respond, I think this is very important to establish in the speech, especially OG asserted in their mechanism that they're going to universally apply this to every country. I think it is important why that's justified to be used. And I guess the question by OO still stands until the end of the debate. Number second, about deterrence, saying that deterrence cannot happen, about the possibility of getting caught and whatnot. I think this point is taken for granted. That's why I cannot give a bigger point in this topic. But thirdly, about structural to individual problem, I think this is very potential, but I don't see the link back why the harm is more tangible compared to the harms that CO brought regarding how the decision making will be hampered even more if you take the director away, because then decision making will be much more complicated, and there's environmental policies that should be implemented in the long term cannot happen also, because then even if the companies are trying to make changes, then if you punish the directors for the past and for the environmental abuses that have been done, therefore decision making will be bad and everything will fall. But secondly, OC already explained like the tangible harm. If that the policy of this motion is applied, then the cost will be too much for the company, for the country, for the consumers. Therefore, the harm is clear inside government. Therefore, I cannot give a higher point to OO regarding this problem about structural to individual problem and making changes, because the importance of why this argument is bigger in magnitude or have tangible harm is missing. I was expecting things probably like international sanctions from other countries, because even if the problems cannot be done internally, then other countries are going to put pressure on other countries and whatnot. But this was not mentioned in OO. Lastly, on COA got first. Number one, on justification about externalities, I think this is very established in your side of the house. But secondly, about disincentivizing companies to make better policies, I think I cannot count on this benefit alone, because it was under explained and not mechanized well. Therefore, I give your points to more on why the problem will be worse inside government on decision making and why it's going to be too much cost for everyone. Therefore, I give CO first. If anyone has a problem with my OA or my decision, you can directly approach me in the WhatsApp because I'm there. And I'm gonna put my phone number here if you want to ask for personal feedback. Yeah. Thanks, guys.